This week we talk about the most important tenant story and actually the other tenant stories that lead up to it, but the rent regulation laws in the New York State expire. So that means those are the laws that authorize New York City to set rent regulation. So that's rent controlled apartments and rent stabilized apartments. Those laws expire this June 16th. That's only 4 days from when this show airs. So at this point, no deal has been reached. There's brinksmanship at play. So the rent regulations are there to protect the tenants who've been there for a while. It's like a grandfather clause, and it helps stabilize neighborhoods. As you can see, all hell is broken loose. We're going to do a rather detailed story about commercial problems and proposals for commercial rent control. But right now, the urgent story is that residential rent control is rent regulations that includes rent control and rent stabilization are expiring. Because they're expiring, there was a big protest in Albany where 3 city council members were actually arrested with over 200 tenant activists, and boy, I wish I had a camera up there. So these lawmakers were, according to the Wall Street Journal, Jumaine Williams, who appeared on last week's show, Lori Cumbo, and Corey Johnson of Manhattan. So that's Jumaine Williams, Lori Cumbo of Brooklyn, and Corey Johnson of Manhattan. So 2 Brooklyn councilmen and 1 Manhattan councilman, and that's it. You would think there would be more. But basically, they held a sit-in in Cuomo's office demanding that he do more to fight for rent control. Now, Cuomo's going around twisting people's arms for all sorts of stuff. Why isn't he doing it for the tenants? Why isn't he protecting over 2-point-something million and possibly statewide 3 million tenants who will be affected by this crisis? The landlords have gone bonkers, and of course there's all sorts of other people going bonkers. You've got Wall Street jacking up the rents. You've got the super rich coming from all over the world with stolen money, conflict diamond money, and money stolen from Chinese government accounts and things like that, and using our town's housing stock as money laundering because Congress tightened up the laws on banking. So you can't even go to a Swiss bank and be anonymous. But here in New York, you can buy a giant billion-dollar condo without putting up your real name. You can have like 20 different LLCs and shell corporations doing it for you. Now, the other law that's expiring on June 16th is what's called 421A. Another name for that is the landlord giveaway. Basically, you see all this construction going on, right? Well, 421A is to encourage rich people with tax breaks to build housing. So what 421A does is encourage people to build what they're going to build anyway because the housing market's hot, right? So they're already building. So 421A means they get to build these expensive houses and then don't have to pay taxes on them. Now, a lot of tenants don't get it. Well, what's the big deal about that? But if you're an actual small homeowner, well, you don't get the tax break, and you're the one who needs it, not the multi-billionaire who's going to make billions off of these deals. The 421A law is a giant scam. So it used to have a purpose, at least in theory, but when there's a booming housing market, it doesn't make sense at all. So the protesters are in Albany saying, look, drop 421A because it's a scam, because they say we're building these luxury units which they can charge whatever they want, billions and billions, and we promise to keep a certain amount affordable. And what they call affordable is, for instance, a family of 4 needs an income of $250,000 to qualify for affordable. So, it's like affordable, from billionaire standards. So it's a big scam. And not only that, there's no sort of enforcement over who gets these affordable units. Now, some of the places have some sort of enforcement. Not all of them are intentionally scammy. But some of the 421As, you find, well, gee, it's like the landlord's best friend's brother is living in there and calling it affordable. And basically, it's affordable for the people he was going to give sweet deals anyway. The protests in Albany are to try and pressure Governor Cuomo to do something to fight for tenants, instead of, fighting for everybody else and twisting arms on every other issue. He's going to let a large majority of the people who voted for him and people who were in delicate situations where a rent increase, like a massive rent increase, and where the constant lack of stability that market housing has, basically could end up having a giant homeless crisis. So they're trying to force him. Governor Cuomo is saying, let's do something more reasonable. Let's change his proposals. Let's change vacancy decontrol. Instead of setting the decontrol at $2,500, let's make it $2,700, which is absurd. That's not even keeping up with inflation. He's also saying, let's make some modest changes to major capital improvement increases. It's MCI. Now, Mayor de Blasio is saying, get rid of vacancy decontrol altogether. Vacancy decontrol is something new. That was something in the late 90s, 1998. He's saying limit MCI severely, and he's saying get rid of the tenant bonus. So when you get a tenant out of rent stabilization, rent stabilized apartment, the landlord gets to jack up the rent an extra 20% just because it's vacant. That has caused a hemorrhage of affordable apartments. So Governor Cuomo has the state police arrest these tenant activists and these public officials, which is not a cool thing. But, that's probably why they did it. But Cuomo wasn't around. He actually decided to hold a tenant protest of his own, which is kind of interesting. Governor Cuomo says he is trying to make himself look like he's fighting for people who vote for him. That the Metropolitan Council on Housing called it a scam. Or is it? No, not scam. They called it bogus. So that's the same as scam. So that's Ava Farkas called the rally a load of nonsense. So she quotes, this is to The Real Deal. She quotes, while real estate-driven corruption scandals swirl, Cuomo sits on Albany's biggest pile of real estate cash and holds a bogus rally in support of corrupt rent laws. No wonder his job approval ratings are going down as fast as working families' rents are going up. Bravo to Miss Farkas. Governor Cuomo is in a strange position. It's strange anyway because of the differences in the state. So what I mean by that is that New York State is not just New York City. And when you are an elected official for the entire state of New York, you are dealing with almost 4 different states. I mean, it's a huge state. And one huge chunk is New York City. And then there are these other 3 chunks, basically. And their interests aren't always the same. Upstate New York is unbelievably backwards in some ways, and New York City is unbelievably backwards in some ways. And it's like we have this strange multiplicity that a state official has to balance out. But this is a no contest, no brainer. And this is why Governor Cuomo is holding quote unquote tenant rallies in Harlem. He cannot, pretend to be a Republican and hope to go to higher office. He can't even hope to hold the office he's in at this rate. There's corruption scandals all around him. His political capital is dwindling, and he has to do something. Now, some people say, well, your political capital is dwindling, so that means you need money more than ever. Well, actually, he needs to separate himself from the real estate industry. He needs to put them at a distance, particularly now he is under investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office. I mean, and not just any U.S. Attorney's Office. This is Sir Galahad. This is Lancelot, here in the Southern District of New York, who has successfully, done some takedowns. He's going for some big fish. And Cuomo's the biggest fish of all. He needs to build something, put a wall between himself, and the money that has brought down the other three men in the room. Well, anyway, that's just my opinion. So, sometimes tenants don't understand. Well, okay, so this 421A thing. Well, the problem with 421A is that it is such a scam. You're paying people to build what they build anyway. It's sort of like saying we're going to give people a car to help poor people. We're going to give them a tax incentive. So to help poor people, if you buy a Rolls Royce, okay, we're going to make it so you don't pay the sales taxes. So that'll encourage people to buy Rolls Royces. Well, the people who are going to buy Rolls Royces don't need your incentive to buy the Rolls Royce, quiet as it's kept. And if they've got that much money, they don't need you to help them buy the Rolls Royce. But they're happy to take corporate welfare. They're happy to take billionaire welfare. And that's what the 421A program generally is. And more than that, it gives the illusion of stabilization. But it actually, what they call affordable isn't affordable. And it allows the super selective process where, basically you're like a peon to the landlord. You have to give them all your data to apply, and then after you apply, there's this giant list that no one knows, who no one controls, and they have all your data, and you're basically not a tenant, and nobody poor can ever qualify for these places. It really makes it a city of the rich. 421A is definitely an unnecessary scam. Even in the best scenario, it's unnecessary. Who needs help to build buildings? They're all building them all over the place now. They want to take over East New York now. So with all of these activities going on, the question is where will we be on June 16th? Now that's interesting, because we have several people who are contrarian, and not just landlords and landlord buddies, but people who are saying we're not that bad off without them. More than a few years ago, we had two of our lawyers/hosts of Rent Wars actually discussing rent regulation and theorizing what would happen if it was gone. And, it's interesting. One of them lived in a rent-stabilized apartment at the time and continues to live in a rent-stabilized Manhattan apartment. And the other one didn't, and now lives in a rent-stabilized apartment but wants to move because it's just not as nice as what he's used to. They were talking about, if market rates reigned, what would happen is that all the rents would go down, that they're being arbitrarily kept up by these rent regulations. And the problem with those theories is they're nice on paper, but they don't take into account reality. They don't take into account what happens. What happens when rent regulation fails for people is that they suddenly are in a position where they can't afford to live. They become homeless. And what happens once you become homeless is you can no longer participate in the market rate. When there's tenant blacklists, you can no longer participate in the market rate. When there are all these problems that are happening, all these theories mean nothing. So that's my take on it, because the thought was, well, all this building, there'll be all these apartments built, and voila, end of housing crisis. Well, we've had building going up the wazoo, and not once have you seen anything go down in rent. And why is that? Well, because this is something unexpected. Billionaires from around the world decided to invest in real estate and leave the apartment in New York City real estate and leave the apartments empty just so they could launder their money and hide their money from whoever they're hiding from. Now, the New York Times did a great job on that, reporting about the Time Warner building and all the scams going on there. But it's nice that, people being pushed out, and we're talking about giving all these developers all this money and yada yada yada, all these theories. In the end, none of them work, because nothing is affordable when you have a loss of jobs, and many of the jobs, and not just loss of jobs, but the jobs that replace those lost jobs are all barely above minimum wage. We have the union middle class workforce, and work standards and work protections are being eroded left and right. And so in this environment, the tenant regulations are crucial. It's like taking life support off of someone in the hospital while they're still in need of that life support. It's like denying a kidney patient, a person with kidney failure, dialysis. You are killing them. This is a serious, serious situation. Now, to present a contrary view, we have the Gotham Gazette, which is very interesting, where they're saying, well, if the rent regulations expire, it won't be that big a deal, because eventually a deal will be reached, even if it's after June 16th. That is not my take on it. I think you have to feel urgency. You have to understand the danger, because if there's ever a sense of complacency, people can be doomed. Now, if it goes to June 18th or even July 1st and they retroactively apply the law, well, okay then. That's not so bad. But to act as though the expiration isn't important is definitely not reasonable in any way, shape, or form. Now, the Gotham Gazette did an article basically talking to many of the players regarding the expiring rent regulations, and their point of view is more so that it's a horse trade in Albany. That's fine, but you can't not be concerned about it, because it's too important. If the Senate Republicans go, ha ha ha, we're not going to do it, we're just going to sit and stamp our feet, this is serious. So it has to be looked at seriously. And the concerns are, and I love the article they wrote. The concerns are that, hey, we've got Bill de Blasio flying all over the country talking to everybody else and not focusing on our issues, and Governor Cuomo basically doing these scams to look like he's fighting for tenants when he's not. The reality is that when he wants something done, he can twist everyone's arm and make it happen. But he doesn't do that. Not for us. Why? Well, because the real estate industry has money, and that's what Governor Cuomo likes, money. But that money is going to get him locked up in a federal penitentiary, because he needs to start focusing on his constituents. I know this is a novel idea here in New York. So anyway, The other surprising source of why do we need rent regulation questioning, what if New York had no rent regulations? That is the title of the article from, believe it or not, the Village Voice. What if New York had no rent regulated apartments? And they have been, or they used to be, one of the big sources of tenant news with the 10 worst landlords list and all of that. They were the innovators back when Julia Lobia was alive and was on their staff. But they take up certain questions. So they say, myth, and they're talking to someone with this theory. It's not their theory. They're talking about the myths of New York. A majority of tenant households in New York are rent burdened. And it says 38 myth. That's the myth. Fact: 38% of tenant households in New York City are rent burdened. Well, that's because the other 30% that used to be part of the majority that were rent burdened are now homeless. Newsflash. Myth: market rate units are not affordable to most tenants. In market rate units, 54% of tenants have affordable rent. Well, yeah, affordable to the billionaires who moved in and displaced everybody. Myth: a rent-regulated housing unit is an affordable unit. Among tenants in rent-regulated units, 44% are rent burdened. Imagine how much more burdened they'd be if they were not able to afford the rent at all and ended up homeless. And incidentally, ending up homeless ends up burdening everybody else. So we need to have the rent stabilized. Middle-income households can't find affordable housing in New York. That's the myth. Fact: yes, 96% of middle-income households are not rent burdened. All right, well, here's what I love the Village Voice did. They said, and here's the chart for what's middle income. Okay, middle income, family of 4, is 98,000 to 134,000. Okay, middle income family of 1, that's a single person, has to make 68,000 to 94,000 to count as middle income. All right, yes, thank you kindly. That's not middle income, that's upper middle income. But in this city, it's probably not anymore because soon they're going to be homeless with those salaries. So that's the chart. And mind you, that's a bogus chart as well, but we'll get into that another day. And FYI, just in case you're wondering, that's not even adjusted for inflation. That's from 2011. So in reality, what they mean by middle income is over $100,000 a year as a single person. Per working person in the family, each has to make over $100,000. Or one has to make $200,000 for a family of 2. It's just amazing. That's what they're calling middle income. Yeah, I mean, middle income, yeah. Really? Incidentally, using that chart, most of our public officials will soon fall out of middle income at this rate. So, in using their salaries. So, when they're talking about things being affordable, and that's the trick of 421A as well, they're saying, oh, it's affordable to these guys, with over $100,000 a year in salary. Well, that's not cool. That's a scam, and that's what 421A is. It's a scam, and it needs to be left to expire, and they need to protect and strengthen the rent laws. Well, why can't you just do a straight extender like Cuomo is basically talking about? Well, straight extender is awful. We're sinking. There are holes in the boat. If we want to stay alive and not drown, you have to plug the holes in the boat, and start bailing some of the water out. That's why a straight extender is not good enough. So we shall see what happens on June 16th. Cross your fingers, pay attention, and, let people know there's going to be hell to pay if you end up homeless. There's going to be hell to pay if you can't have your apartment and live in it. It's dangerous out there in terms of what's going on with this rent and with just displacing people with phony hotels and with all these scams and everything else that's happening in New York. Even the businesses have been run out of business. New York is no longer New York. It's a giant shopping mall, the same stores every couple of blocks because they've gotten rid of everything. So pay attention. It could be you next. June 16th, the rent regulations expire. So pay attention and let people know you're paying attention and let your public officials know. For Rent Wars, this is Ronan Amano. Till next week. Check out Rent Wars episodes online. Go to our website, www.rentwars.com, or to our YouTube channel that's on youtube.com. And you can pick up episodes of Rent Wars. All of our most recent episodes are up there. Our new episodes are going to be up there going forward. And our old episode library from our past 10 years, that which wasn't destroyed by corrupt federal judges, that is, will be put up there piece by piece as well over time. So check out rentwars.com and see episodes of Rent Wars and share episodes of Rent Wars with your friends who aren't fortunate enough to have cable television. We promise to keep a certain amount affordable, and what they call affordable is, for instance, a family of four needs an income of $250,000 to qualify for affordable. So it's like affordable, from billionaire standards.